behavioral design in action. What I'm going to walk you through is the design approach that we use at Irrational Labs to help develop data-driven, behaviorally informed, testable designs for behavior change. And so in my opinion, the best way to learn is just walking through an example. So I'll walk us through a real live case study. So this is the behavioral design approach, right? And the example I'll walk us through today is we worked with a group called Admit Hub back in the day. They're actually called Mainstay now, but they're a company dedicated to helping meet student needs as they work towards pursuing a college degree. And in this case, we were focused on how do we increase applications for financial aid. So through FAFSA, if you're familiar with this program, it's in the US, it's basically how you're granted need-based aid and or federal loans. It is a separate application process to the regular standard college application process you might use to get into specific universities, but it is now standardized across colleges. So how do we go about this problem from a behavioral design perspective? And step number one, we identify a key behavior. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this 3B framework. It's how we think about behavior change. And the first B is, of course, the key behavior. And this is the action that we want users to take. So in this case, we want people to fill out this application for financial aid, this free to get free money. It's in their best interest. They want to do it. They're not doing it. How do we help them do it? And the hunch is that this is a behavior that's correlated or maybe even has a causal relationship with the outcome you ultimately want to drive. And so in this case, it's more eligible students take up the free aid that they're qualified for. And so what was interesting about the data in this case, before I show you how dire it really was at this point, what's interesting is that when you survey students and you ask them why they're not applying, they tell you that they think they're not eligible to receive money, which, by the way, might suggest that education would be a logical solution, right? Because we could use their eligibility rules to inform them and to correct their beliefs. But what do we all now know about educational interventions? These don't work as well as we hope they would. And so Harvard researchers actually did try this. They did give students more eligibility information and found it had no positive effect in the application rate. And so it's really sad and it's really depressing because the truth is a lot of people were leaving free money on the table. 2 million students, 2 million more students were eligible to apply than ultimately did so, and left that money on the table, which could have helped them afford a college education. And so with that in mind, we move into the second step of behavioral design. We start to conduct this behavioral diagnosis. And so a behavioral diagnosis is a literal map of every step, every click, every decision that a user will have to take to get to the key behavior. And so when we looked at the FAFSA application process that people were going through, they were actually moving through a pretty long path. So if you start with, say, after they've already decided which colleges they want to apply for, they not only need to start the college applications, but they need to decide whether or not they'll apply for financial aid. They need to find the forms. They need to ask their parents for tax info. They need to enter in every single question. And all in all, from start to finish, by the time you've completed the form, you've gone through over 20 really difficult, really cognitively demanding steps that ultimately get you to the point where you can hit submit. And so at this point, we're looking at this map, we're looking at all the steps, and we're layering on the psychologies or human biases at play when they're considering each step or each decision. And when we say biases, again, if we think back, we're thinking about what's slowing them down, what's making them pause and say, do I want to consider this? And that's the second B in the 3B framework, the barriers. What is the friction? What is keeping someone from continuing to apply? And so there could be cognitive overload at play. So as it is actually in financial decision making often. Why? Because we don't get a lot of practice in these spaces. How often do you apply to go to college? How often do you take out a mortgage? These are really tough problems and we don't get a lot of practice in these spaces. Another thing that could be at play is optimism bias. So when you think about investments in savings, people are overly optimistic about how much they can do, how much they can save, and how quickly. And so these biases are barriers that are getting in the way of folks actually claiming that free money. And with all of these different psychologies in mind, we're prioritizing them. We're thinking about which ones actually prevent folks from moving forward. And this is where we start to brainstorm and form a hypothesis about what could help us overcome this. And we form a hypothesis based about which tactics are most likely to increase motivation, so increase the benefit of getting through the process. That's the third B. So you have the key barrier, the key behavior, the barrier, and the benefits. How do we keep them going? How do we keep them moving? And in this case, again, we were trying to overcome cognitive overload. So we're thinking, okay, what's going to help people feel like they have less to get through, feel like this is less of a choice? And so we start to write out that hypothesis, and it should take the form of if we blank, then blank because blank. So if we do this thing, then it will have this result because there's this key psychology at play. There's this key barrier behavior that we want to address with this barrier that's blocking it, that's influencing the user's behavior. So back to the FAFSA example, when we were doing the literature review, when we were thinking about what's getting in the way, of course, people want free money, but a lot of people don't think they're eligible. So the question is, do I think it's worth it or not to apply? It takes time to apply. It takes effort to get the right information necessary to apply. And so people are questioning just whether or not they should even bother. So what would happen? What would happen if we made it seem less optional? What could happen if we told them it was just part of the normal process? And that's what we wanted to experiment with. And so that became our hypothesis. If we make the FAFSA feel like part of the regular enrollment process, then students will be more likely to apply because the framing decreases the perception of the cost of applying. And so this moves people from an optional mindset, this is something I could do, to a required mindset. This is something I am supposed to do. It's normalized. Students feel like they no longer feel like they need to weigh their options. It's just something they need to start working towards. And at this point, we're moving into experimenting. And so you could pre-test your ideas in a product, out of product in a rigorous way. So this could be using something like MTurk or Prolific. So if you don't necessarily want to go through the engineering process to build out separate screens, you can mock this up and run through one of those survey tools, or you could A/B test with your users in product. And so that's what we did. We ran 2 designs. The first group, again, very vanilla description here. We said, hey, have you started your FAFSA? Here's the deadline, apply here. And for the second group, we tried a different design. We removed any notion that this was optional. We said, update, FAFSA is now a part of your standard fall enrollment process. Here's the deadline, apply here. So it was really subtle, very cool, but very, very simple. And the question became, did it work? And the TLDR is that, yes, it did work. It was very effective. It nearly tripled the odds that students would apply on time for financial aid. And so to put this in context, we ran this experiment with just one university, West Texas A&M. Imagine if you extrapolated this to the entire US population or to a global population, right? That's hundreds of millions of dollars of federal financial aid that's just sitting on the table waiting to be claimed.